Yes. Okay, well, good morning, and I'm starting to record now so that this is all available for viewing at a later date if required. And thank you very much for joining us for MCH 502. So first of all, to introduce myself, I'm Rachel Pascoe. Most of you, I think, I'm looking down the list, either know me or did MCH 501 just gone. But I'm also really pleased to welcome, it feels like we're in television now, welcome Rona, who is a relatively new member of staff. And some of you may have seen her name on your assignment feedback, because although she just joined us in end of January, she was very kind and helped me, as some of you may know, with the marking for MCH 501. She is also taking over as module lead for MCH 504, i.e. the dissertation module, which some of you are going on to in September.
Morning.
So she's waving at you, but you don't know that. So we will present together. So she might interject or interrupt me, or we might have a bit of a conversation for you to listen to at some points during the morning, which might be a little bit different from hearing me droning on as normal. So we are in MCH 502, and as you can see, I have, as usual, put some silly pictures on the DLE page, and we'll just have a quick look through the DLE page as to start off with. And so as normal, in your top left hand corner you've got a reading list, which is quite a short reading list, some key texts. Most of you have already got research texts that you're familiar with. The normal dashboard down the side, general news items at the top, and then your submission tab. So the brief outline of what your submission is, and then we'll go through that in a bit more detail in a minute. We then have our first tile. On that we've got your module record, your module information booklet, which contains all the usual information for a module information booklet, so you can read that at your leisure. There's also some information, some written information about the assignment in there. There's also the assignment guidelines, which we will go through in a moment, and I'll just open the module plan slowly, or maybe not. Pause for thought. So I put the module plan up a little while ago, which will open in its own due time. Goodness me, it's slow today. Unfortunately, I've got the presentations open, so we won't be waiting for these to arrive. So as you can see from this morning from 10 till 12, and the times are set for the webinar bookings, but we'll see where we get to in terms of the content over the course of this morning. So we're just going to go through the module this morning. We're going to look at the assignment guidelines in a little bit of detail. So you have a very clear idea of what's expected for the assignment. We're going to do a bit of a research methodology recap. For those of you that have just done MCH 501, it'll be a bit of a revision. For those of you who haven't done that module, there may be some new information in there, and it might require you to do a little bit of background reading. Then this afternoon we're going to look at the literature review, advanced literature reviewing, and so taking what you may have undertaken in the first module and adapting it, or developing a literature review to focus on your research proposal. And then tomorrow from 11 till 1, we're going to be talking about writing the research proposal. So actually exactly what you need to think about in each of the sections for the assignment guidelines. so that you can submit your research proposal. That takes us, and then you've got Friday afternoon. What I'd quite like you to do, if you've got time set aside, is to really focus on your research aims and objectives. It's really very important that those are clear and focused. So in preparation for the workshop time on Tuesday, it would be very useful for you to have those aims and objectives very clear in your head. Equally, we've got some fantastic resources coming to, from Pam on Monday, and you may have some questions for her in terms of research. So we then move to the research sessions on Monday. Again, they're via webinar. Monday morning is a fixed session. Pam's got an extensive presentation to give you, which will be going up on the DLE hopefully by the end of today. She was just doing some revisions yesterday when we went through it to focus it a little bit more. So that will go up online. There's lots of links in it, so it'll be a very useful resource for you. So she'll be delivering that on Monday morning, and then Monday afternoon is a slightly more flexible session. We might try and use Skype in the afternoon, but don't hold your breath. We might just stick with the webinar. I have a webinar booked, but that's going to be much more of a Q&A. So if you've got specific ethics queries, questions, or things to pose to Pam, that is your opportunity to ask her research ethics questions. And I think Rona will agree, navigating ethics is one of the most challenging bits of your dissertation.
It is.
And so Pam is absolutely fantastic resource for us. Then on Tuesday, I've managed to negotiate a contact day, and I'm aware that some of you are physically coming down to Plymouth, and some of you are not. If you could possibly let me know who is coming, so that I know, have an idea of how many people are actually going to be physically in the room. And Rona and I will be running a workshop over the course of that day. We'll see how many we've got. We'll see whether there's some specific methodological focuses, or whether we can group you together. We'll see, and that'll be quite flexible. If some of you are looking at ethnography, for example, it might be worth having you together, and we'll see what sort of methodological stances we're all taking for that day. And I've got rooms booked from 11 until 4. We've got to move at 2 o'clock, but we'll be quite flexible on that day. So that's Tuesday. Wednesday is, I had to book a physical day, but it doesn't appear in your timetable. You are very welcome to book a one-to-one tutorial with me on that day. And I know for those of you who are physically coming down to Plymouth on Tuesday, you might want to book that tutorial early on Wednesday so you can travel home, or you might want to book it at a different time. It's completely up to you. And that can be a face-to-face tutorial, or it can be a telephone tutorial. And equally, after the module has finished, you are also entitled to come and have a tutorial prior to assignment submission, which again can be either face-to-face or via Skype or phone. It's up to you. But hopefully we'll book that out over the course of the next few days. Okay, so any questions on the timetable? I've got 2 responses in terms of people coming on Tuesday. Are there any others? So I've got Yenny coming. I've got Polly. You don't need to be free all day, Dawn. No, not at all. Whatever works for you in terms of flexibility. If you're travelling down from Taunton, if you want to come just for the middle of the day, that's absolutely fine. It would be quite nice if you there at the beginning, but if you certainly don't need to stay all day. So, Dawn, looking down the list. Lots of you coming, great. Where have I got to? Yes, Michelle, that's absolutely fine. I'd be very happy to see you at the end of the day when it finishes, or we could have a tutorial set aside during the day. I know you're travelling, so whatever works for you in terms of flexibility of your train time. So, Michelle. Kim, you can always borrow a wheelchair. I don't know. I shall read out. Kim is running the London Marathon on Sunday, so she might not be able to walk.
Good luck.
So fantastic. Good luck on Sunday, and you've got Monday to rest. What are you whining about? Honestly, should have recovered by then. Right. So I have got. Right, so by my calculations, I've got Yenny, Lisa, Dawn, a query, Matt, Davis, Tasha, Polly, Kim, if your legs are working, Matt, Rawlins, CZ, Laren, Michelle, and Amanda. Is that, have I missed anybody out? Hi Elizabeth, welcome. I was just talking about the tutorial day on Tuesday and wondering who was going to be joining us. So if you could let me know if you plan to join us on Tuesday, that would be great. You don't have to answer that right now, but if it was in your schedule to come. Okay, so Dawn, you'll be joining us by Skype. Okay, we'll then obviously whatever works for you in terms of when you can Skype in and so on. Okay. Great. Diane, you've got your hand up. Is that for a specific reason, or do you have a? Oh, you put it down there. See, that's what I'm just showing Rona the technology, and sometimes you can people put their hands up. Kim, you've put your hand up. Have you got a question? Demonstrating how interactive webinaring is. Okay, so that's the timetable. Any other questions on the timetable? In terms of tutorials, as I said, that's flexible. You can book those either on the Wednesday. I am available to see you and speak to you on the Wednesday, or at a later stage. Okay? Any questions? Great. Okay, so we will. No, there's nothing else booked on the Wednesday. It's just for tutorials, Dawn. There's no fixed session on that day. Okay, So the timetable covered. Let's have a little look at the assignment guidelines, because I know you'll all be massively focused on the assignment. Okay, so what we're aiming for this assignment is a theoretical research proposal. And the reason I call it, I'm talking about it in terms of a theoretical research proposal, is because I want you to be very clear in your minds that this is not your ethics submission. Your ethics submission is something that comes separately. And depending, Pam will go through this in a large amount of detail on Monday, but depending on who you're going to ask, what you're going to ask, or what sort of research you're going, what kind of inquiry you're going to do, will depend on what sort of research ethics pathway you need to go down. So this assignment is a theoretical research proposal. So this is where I want you to outline exactly what you intend to do. So in terms of your introduction, I've allocated 5 marks. This is a 3,000 word assignment, so you've got to be quite discerning with your words. And it's due in on Tuesday the 31st, is that right? I say that.
I'm sure it's the 31st.
It might have been the Wednesday actually, because it's a bank holiday. Before they all leap at me, because that's the first thing they'll say. Oh no, that's not what I had down. It is the Wednesday the 31st. I should know that. My daughter's birthday is the 30th. And I've got to get my doctorate submission in on the 30th, so I didn't want to mark yours until I'd done mine. So Wednesday the 31st of May by 3 p.m. I think I've put on DLE, and it's submitted via the DLE, and if you've done that for last module, you'll know how easy it is. If you've never submitted anything via the DLE, then please don't hesitate to ask me if you've got any queries. So submitted on Wednesday the 31st of May via the DLE, a 3,000 word assignment. Introduction, outlining your chosen subject area. So this is where you're setting the scene, you're telling me what you're intending, what sort of area you're looking at, and what you're going to what your chosen subject area is going to be. Then I'm expecting a brief literature review. Some of you will have already done a literature review. Obviously, some of you did it for your narrative review for 501. You'll slightly refocus it here. Firstly, it's only 2,000. It's only 20 marks. It's only a short piece of work. I'm only expecting sort of 700 words, roughly 750 words. So you are clearly outlining the focus of your literature and giving a clear rationale for the subject and why this particular research is needed. So you're taking, in a way, that synthesis section from the previous module and adapting it. And those of you who didn't do the previous module, this is where you might have to do a little bit of work around your particular chosen area, have a look about what's published, ensure that you are establishing that there's an appropriate rationale for this study to be undertaken. So literature review, 20 marks. We then come into the bulk of the assignment, which is the research proposal section. And 55 marks are allocated for this section, and I've broken it down into subheadings. You're starting off your research proposal with a clear research aim and some objectives. It is fundamentally important that these are well put together. It is essential, starting a piece of research, that this bit is clear and focused, because it's really what I'm marking the assignment against. If, once I've read the rest of it, I look back at those research aims and objectives and go, well, that methodology and that method of data collection and that method of analysis is not going to answer the question that, or the statement that's been set out at the beginning of the research proposal, then the research proposal itself doesn't stand up. To make a cooking analogy, which you know I'm always doing, if you say you're going to make a chocolate cake and then you don't put chocolate in it, you haven't made a chocolate cake. So you've got to be very, very clear. And one of the bulk of the time we spend together on Tuesday, whether it's physically or virtually, is going to be making sure that those aims and objectives are right. Because once you've got those right, the rest sort of falls into place, it follows. So if you set out a specific research aim that outlines a specific method of inquiry, then the next bit follows on. So your methodology then underpins it, and you can be clearly focused on it. Then your method of data collection, or methods of data collection, and what you've chosen to do, what information you've chosen to collect, is very clearly outlined. The plan of the investigation with an achievable timeline, and then your analysis, how you're going to analyse the data that you've actually collected. And so all of those things need to match and follow on from each other and sit together as a package. And so it's really important that that first bit is right. And we'll spend quite a bit of time talking about that on Tuesday. Your next section is for 10 marks, is about ethics. Obviously, Pam is going to talk to you about ethical principles and so on Monday. But this is where I need you to outline that you've clearly addressed the ethical issues that you might come across. So whoever you're asking, have you thought about all the key issues regarding ethical permissions, confidentiality, informed consent, and so on? So we'll go through exactly what's required in that section a bit more tomorrow, but only 10 marks, which might look quite small, but it is fundamental. And it's where, if you get this section wrong, I can sort of turn around and say you haven't understood the method of inquiry. So it really needs to be clearly outlined. And then your final section is your conclusion, your recommendations. So this is where you're not going to predict what you're going to find, but this is where you would outline, make a legitimate conclusion for your research proposal. So why is this piece of research required? What will it be its potential benefits for practice, for education, for further research? Where does it sit? And this is where you might be referring back to your initial introduction and certainly your literature review, saying this is why this piece of work is required. Okay, so briefly, that's an outline of your research proposal and how the marks are allocated and what, in basic terms, what we're looking for. So any questions on that? Well, Rona, they've either all died or I've scared the life out of them, and they're not now speaking to me. But I think they're all still alive. Yes. Scared.
Oh, don't be. This is a good one.
Still alive, just. Okay. Yeah. Please don't be scared. I mean, I know I do completely. See where you're coming from, because you look at that and you think, oh my goodness me. But one of the slightly easier, maybe I shouldn't say easier, maybe slightly more
That's what you're going to say.
Yeah, factors of this particular assignment is a research proposal is a set structure. It has set headings, it has set things, and you look at other people's research proposals, and I have actually put 2 examples, and I'll show you those in a minute, of a research proposal on the DLE. There's not a lot of scope for deviation. When I do the session tomorrow on writing your research proposal, I will give you the headings I'm expecting you to use. I'm expecting you to have subheadings in this assignment. It's not a piece of narration. It's not a narrative like you may have written in assignments before. It's got set fixed boxes of content that you've got to do. So it has a really strong emphasis on structure in this assignment, which some people might find a little bit restrictive, but there is a level of security in that structure. So if you've done the aims and objectives, you then go on to your methodology, you then go on to your methods of data collection, and so on. And so there's a real set, would you not?
I would agree, and I'd also say that this is a foundation for the dissertation you're going to write next year as well. So you will have your introduction, literature review and methodology section already set out, if you like. And so from there, you'll only have results of discussion and draw conclusions. So you're sort of halfway through doing the dissertation anyway. So really important. I think using headings is very important. It gives structure to your work, makes it easier for us to understand than anybody else who's coming along who doesn't know what you're interested in. I think that's fair, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, you know, I understand that you might be a little anxious, but yeah, don't worry, and we're here to help. Okay, any other specific questions? Well, yeah, obviously it's not set in stone. This is an assignment and it stands on its own, Lisa, as an assignment. So Lisa's asked what happens if you change your mind.
Oh, you can change your mind.
Of course you can change your mind.
If you're doing research, whenever you make a proposal, it always changes. Your end result always changes anyway, whether that's master's or a PhD. So you start out with an idea, and that idea is always flexible until you submit your final piece of work for your dissertation.
Which is why it can form the foundation for your dissertation, but equally you might completely change your mind. You also, and this happens in life, doesn't it? We might change jobs, we might change focus, we might completely change interest. What I would say is if you are likely to change, just keep in mind how long some of these things take, and how for your dissertation you would have to then redo a literature review, redo a research proposal, so if you choose a subject now, and it doesn't have to be the same one that you wrote the previous assignment on, and if it doesn't have to be, lost my train of thought then.
My crystal ball's not working.
It doesn't have to be the same subject, but find something that you're interested in now and you have a passion for, because if you don't find it particularly interesting now, trust me that by November, December this year, when you're trying to embark on it for your dissertation, if you find it a bit dull now, you'll find it deathly boring then. And then cleaning the fridge and doing the ironing becomes far more appealing than doing your work. So pick a subject that you're passionate and interested in, is the response to, but you can of course change your mind. So in terms of, I'm just going to take some of these questions in order. So I hope that clears that up, Lisa. So you can, but
I wouldn't recommend it.
I wouldn't recommend it, because you're doing an awful lot of really, really fundamental groundwork in this assignment that can support the dissertation and make your life considerably easier in September.
Can I just add to that? If you are thinking about that, if you have a subject in mind or an issue in mind, it's fine if you do the foundation work now and you maybe switch perspectives as opposed to completely changing the subject. So that's what you might find comes along, and that's okay. That's not so difficult to do.
So Amanda, you're talking about you are talking about doing a systematic review for your dissertation. So in terms of the literature review section, it's still really important that you get an overview, a sort of narrative overview of what's been written in the literature before you refocus your research question for your systematic review. So that the process of a research proposal is it is the same for a systematic review, because you've still got that process that you need to go through. In terms of ethics, no, you won't need ethics, but you may need permissions if you are going to be reanalyzing other people's data. You might need permissions also if you are reanalyzing other people's findings using a different research question. So I know that there are different permissions required for systematic reviews. You don't have to go through the formal ethics process, but you still need to think about ethics, because if you're asking a new question of the data, which is what you're doing in a systematic review, there might be ethical considerations that you will need to take into account, but there will be specific ones for a systematic review. I hope that answers your question, Amanda. But I have already identified who your supervisor will be. You might not know this, but I'll talk to you about that offline. They are very knowledgeable in the systematic review field. Lisa, well, if you're not entirely sure, then it's time to start thinking and focusing, because I think you can really get a great start for the dissertation module next year. Well, Michelle, that's absolutely fine, and that's what Rona was just saying about changing focus. It's a subject area, so I know some of you have got subject areas that you're interested in, things that you've looked at in terms of your literature reviews in the past, or in the assignment that you've just done, or just from your own personal reading. When you develop that as a research question or statement and turn that into a research aim, you might then go down a specific line in terms of methodology, and you might submit that for this assignment. But it might turn out that in practical terms, when it comes to September, or when you are together with your supervisor, that process changes and you start thinking differently about it, or you might want to adapt it slightly, and you might have to adapt it. There might be practical reasons why you have to adapt it. So what you intend to do, even when you submit your ethics approval, doesn't necessarily turn out to be what you actually do. And there's always, you probably ought not to say wiggle room in terms of ethics, but there always is a little bit of movement.
But not, it is and it isn't. It depends on how much it changes, really.
Yeah.
So just be careful. You don't want to have to start again with the process.
You don't want to have to start again, and that's where your supervisor will really keep you on track, and they will advise you as to if you are going outside the parameters of which you've got ethical permissions from. Certainly, if you take a grounded theory perspective in your research, then there may be an iterative process from collecting the data that takes you in a specific path. But getting ethical clearance for a piece of grounded theory will ask specific questions of you. So I hope, does that answer? Well, I'm glad a couple of you have asked about supervisors. Nervous laugh. I am really, what's fantastic this year is Rona, as I said, is taking over the dissertation module for next year, and so we're working quite closely together in this module so that your supervisor is identified, and so once you've got an idea of the research focus, so by Tuesday, and some of you I've already got linked to people in my mind, but we'll talk. You might also have identified somebody you would like to supervise you. You might know of members of staff that are available to supervise you, and so that's a conversation we can have. So if we're together physically on Tuesday, if not, certainly in terms of your tutorial time, I will hopefully have got a name, or certainly tell you when a name will become available. I hope that doesn't sound too vague.
Not remotely vague. I think it's quite good for now.
What I'm saying is there are people. I need to find out whether they're available, and once I know your research focus and your research approach, then I will start matching you to people. There are some of you that I've already matched because I already know what you're going to do. And so, yeah, that's, hopefully that clears that up. Diane, well, it's completely up to you. You might have, if you've done your previous research module somewhere else, and you want to change focus completely, then that's your decision, and start with something new, especially if it was a while ago. So as I said before, pick something that you're interested in, pick something that you have a passion about, and so I wouldn't necessarily say look at something new, but you know, that's completely your decision. Okay. And I'm just going to go back to an earlier question, just so I do it in order. Right, about number of references.
As many as you need. It's a question that I personally have never asked, and it's one that I was never taught to ask either, is you reference everything that needs to be referenced. It's that simple. So if it's a statement or you're copying, quoting, you must always reference. And if you're making a big statement, you have to have evidence to be able to make it at this stage for a master. So reference everything that you need to reference. It's that simple. I don't know if you agree with that.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I mean, they work on the principle that it's 10 references per 1,000 words.
No.
But I think that's a little bit arbitrary. If you look at the sections, in your introduction, for example, I would expect there to be a number of references that support your chosen subject area. And those references might come from policy, or you know, national guidelines, or something, you know, strategic, so that there is a sort of social policy, sociological focus in your introduction. So I'd expect there to be 3 or 4 references in that first section. In your literature review, there's going to be a whole host of references, obviously, because you are referring to the body of knowledge. Now, if you're looking at the use of, I'm trying to think of something really obscure, you know, the use of a really specific drug in the treatment of a really, you know, defined illness, there may be very few references available. There may be a very small body of knowledge to support that, and therefore I wouldn't expect there to be an awful lot of references. But in that 20, in that literature review section, there would need to be some. If you're looking at, you know, hand washing techniques in the acute care sector, well, if you did a primo search on that as a topic area, I'd expect there to be 40, 50, 60 references in the last 5 years alone. So, I mean, I'm not going to make a definitive number. Then we move into the research proposal. This is where your research references are going to be predominant. So aims and objectives wouldn't necessarily need a research, but your methodology section, if you're talking about grounded theory and you haven't referenced Corbyn and Strauss and Goober and Lincoln and some fundamental names in qualitative research, then I would think that section is weak. Equally, if you're talking about you're doing a quantitative study and you're coming at it from a critical realist perspective, this is some things that we'll be discussing in a minute when we do a bit of revision on research, and you don't mention somebody like Margaret Archer, then I would expect that would be a weak methodology section. So that section requires its own set of references. And then we go into the method of data collection section, and you are looking at interviewing, for example. I would expect there to be some interviewing references. So references from the research literature that support the use of interviews as a data collection technique. So I think what I'm saying is that the references for each section will come from a slightly different body of information, but they will be there to support what you're discussing. So I hope that answers that question. But I'm not going to give you a definitive number. Sorry. I'm not really apologising, but yeah, anyway. So, right, I'm just going down my questions, make sure I've answered them all. Right, so Diane, I've answered your question. Yenny, you were talking, you have to have ethics before you commence any kind of empirical research. So if you're doing any research at all, you have to go through ethics first. Now, in terms of the research, the dissertation module, you should not start data collection until the physical module starts.
Correct.
So, but it doesn't mean that you haven't already done the ethics process. And I think that's what Rona and I are working towards in this, that the ethics process might be undertaken in late summer, early September, so that when you start the module in early September, you are literally ready to go. But you can't start it until you're enrolled on the module, and that's for legal and liability and so on rush reasons. So, so you need to get ethics first. You can't start data collection until you've started the module, and the module doesn't start until September. So hopefully that answers your question.
You can start thinking about your ethics when you finish this.
So
you've got the information, then it's easier to complete it.
Yeah. So that if we are looking in terms of when ethics committee sits, there is one in July, there is also one in September. I don't think you've got enough time to get it to the July one, but I would like to think that all of you are getting it to the September one. But if you are having to go, and this is what Pam will talk to you about on Monday, if you're having to go through IRAS first, then you'll need to start that in the summer as soon as you finish this module. If you are simply going through the university faculty research ethics committee, then you can go through that in September when it sits. Okay, so does that answer everybody's questions? Yes, only because, Yenny, we are now wholly aware of how complex the ethics process is, and you only have a very limited amount of time on the module, so for the dissertation, and so if you don't get it started, then you run out of time. So, which is why we are working together to get it done sort of as you start, if not before you've started.
At least have all the information.
Yeah. Because as Pam will show you on Monday, the forms are onerous and time-consuming. I think that's the simplest way of putting it.
The lightest way, isn't it?
Yes. Okay. So is that everybody's questions? Which is why, again, as soon as the module finishes, or as as we go through this module, that's why I'm going to try and get you linked up with your supervisor in this module, or as soon as I possibly can. How long? I'm sorry, Lisa, I'm not quite sure. The dissertation module starts early September or mid-September. So about
I think it's actually, well, it's no later than, I can't remember the exact dates, I think it's before then, and submission is in August. So you have under 12 months to do it.
So you have a sort of calendar year, roughly. I think it starts the week of the 11th. Somewhere around there.
I have got the date.
Yeah, so mid-September the module starts, which is when you are enrolled and you have your first workshop. And then you submit at the end, or mid...
20-something of August is submission day.
So you submit in August. So if you think one would hope that the bulk of your data collection is happening in sort of January, February time. So that does not give you a lot of time to then analyse and write up. So I would ideally think that by the beginning of March you've finished your data collection.
Absolutely.
So that you've got enough time to write up. The dates for the workshops for 17-18 will be available as soon as Rona tells me what they are.
I don't know exactly, but there's one early September, there's one early November, and the other one is in March, usually the first 2 weeks of each month. And then there are presentations in early June, where you get feedback on what you've done so far, which will be most of it, just so that you can tighten up anything that's weak, and then you submit in August.
And the presentations in June are really wonderful, because what we've done in the past is presented to some of the supervisors, so not just your supervisor, but hopefully a whole group of supervisors and some of your peers. And what we do is we give feedback, and we do some questioning, and which really, and it's to think of it as a sort of your formative feedback in a way, because it allows you to make any adjustments, to reanalyze data if it's not clear, to really focus the project, and it gives you some really clear time lines to work towards.
You still have another 10 weeks or so after the presentations to make those adjustments, so you've got plenty of time.
Yeah, but it's always been a really useful day. So, yeah. Okay, so any other questions? I'm deleting all your questions now. So, okay, anything else before we move on? Do they have, I'm not sure if you've got Rona's email address, but in terms of she was on the email I sent yesterday, so that's her contact details, and I will make sure that they're on the DLE somewhere. So in terms of dissertation questions, if you'd like to focus them to Rona in the future, then she will be able to answer them. And of course, I'm making the assumption that all of you are definitely going to go on to the dissertation stage. But it might be quite nice if you could let myself and Rona know whether you're definitely going to go on to the dissertation stage next year, so starting in September 17. So I know some people like to take a year out for all sorts of reasons. You don't need to let me know right now, Lisa, but in the future, in the near future. Okay. So that was the assignment guidelines. Oh, we haven't got very far, have we? Which one? Right. Okay. So that is the. So we've got our little. We've got our My Little Pony unicorns this time, for no apparent reason. Thanks, Polly. Great. And as always, the corresponding sections have the corresponding sessions that we're going to go through. So in the under the different tiles will be the corresponding information, and what I will do is upload the recording to the different tiles when they're done. So we've got the red unicorn has got the module information, blue unicorn has got the advancing literature review, which will be uploaded when we've done that this afternoon. We've got our research question and research methodology under the gold unicorn. Ethics for purple, and pink is writing a research proposal. In that tile, which I'm just going to focus your attention on for a moment, I've got a series of research articles which are quite useful, and I've got a folder which has got examples. These are 2 examples from 2015-16 academic year. There's a quantitative example and a qualitative example, and they got mid 70s. I've anonymised them so you don't know whose they are, but they do give you an outline of what's expected, and so they're there for reference. I know they can be quite useful at times, so they're there for you if you want to look at them. Okay, so any questions before we start the presentation? No? Okay. Right, I need a drink of water first. No, I'm all right with water. Thanks, Lisa. There's an expression that we use in our house, which is TMI, which is too much information. You don't need to share your bathroom breaks with me. Okay, so I remember what the presentation is. There we go. So for some of you, this is going to be purely revision. Why is it doing that? I think I click on that page. Okay, it's misbehaving, so I'm going to just leave it like this, I think. So there we go. So for some of you, as I said, this is purely revision. And yes, the slideshow is on the DLE. It's under the, I can't remember which colour unicorn now, but it's, I'll have a look in a minute. It's under the gold unicorn. No, it's not under the blue one, it's under the gold one, Polly. And people say webinars aren't interactive. Okay, so we're talking about research methodology. So for some of you, as I said, this is going to be revision. For some of you, this might be revision from a while ago, some longer than others. So hopefully, just put your hand up or type a question if you've got one at any point, and I'll hope to address it, or I might see if Rona can address it.
I might not be able to.
She's laughing at me, I'm not sure why. Okay, so we're talking about, remember, we're talking about research paradigms. And this is my favourite topics, isn't it? When you're putting together a research proposal, it is so important that you have that background knowledge, and that section that you're going to write about your methodology really is the framework of everything you're going to do after it. So it's understanding that the bricks and mortar before you put anything else in the building. You have to get that bit right. And so firstly, you're going to make a decision, and at the beginning of your research question about what perspective you're going to come from. Where are you going to take this piece of research? Are you going to do a piece of empirical positivist research, or are you going to do a piece of interpretive qualitative research? You can't be both. You have to make a decision right at the beginning. Now, don't get me wrong, that doesn't mean that you can't employ techniques that are borrowed from one side or the other. But that perspective that you take at the beginning has to be very clear. So you're either going to be a positivist or you're going to be an interpretivist or a humanist. And so you're going to look at those two opposing perspectives. And in the literature, you might see it talked about as quantitative and qualitative. To me, that's a little bit basic. At this level, you need to be digging a little bit deeper than just saying it's a quantitative piece of work. So you need to look at, and you'll remember these, some of these terms when we get to them, about ontology and epistemology. So if you are coming from a quantitative stance, you are doing a piece of deductive research. So you may start your research aim at the beginning. Will talk about testing a hypothesis. You will be seeking to prove something. You will be seeking to establish that one treatment is better than another, or one drug is more effective than another, or one particular educational approach is better than another. But it's that idea that you are seeking to establish that there is a body of evidence that will prove that this statement that you've made is correct. And so you will have to employ data collection techniques that match that methodological stance. Equally, if you are coming from a qualitative perspective, you're doing a piece of inductive research, you're talking about advancing theory. So there's no element of proof required. That's not what that type of research is seeking to establish. It's about advancing theory now. So you are looking at inquiry, you're exploring, examining, and in trying to advance the ideas surrounding some particular stance. And therefore your methods of data collection will match that methodological stance. So when we're looking at quantitative research, we're often, oh, I've got these the wrong way around, and I keep meaning to change them. I'm going to do it right now. Because it shouldn't. You see, this is editing. He says webinaring isn't interactive, eh? Right. Qualitative research on the left. We're looking at words, not necessarily, but that, which is why I've put it in inverted commas. But we're looking for reason. We're seeking to understand something. So there's a level of subjectivity. On the opposing ontology, we are looking at numbers. So we're looking at a causal relationship. So we're seeking to explain something, and there's a level of objectivity. And when I'm talking about subjectivity and objectivity, I'm talking about the stance that the researcher is taking to the methods and the data that they're collecting. So again, it's about you being absolutely clear what you're trying to find out. And I'll say that to you quite a lot, probably irritatingly a lot on Tuesday. It's like, what are you trying to find out? What are you trying to discover? What is it that you're trying to explore and investigate? And so it's absolutely essential that that's clear at the beginning. So when we're looking at research, we talk about the theoretical foundations. So remember this from last time, we talked about ontology, epistemology, methodology, and method. And it's like an address. Starts with the top and works down, and it follows, it matches. If your ontology is such, that will determine what your epistemology is, which will determine what your methodology is, which will really indicate the methods of data collection that you're intending to use. So they have to sit together. And what we're looking for when we mark a research proposal is that approach is clear and matching.
I would totally agree.
So what do I mean when I talk about ontology? So I've got two different opposing ideas there. I've got an interpretive ontology. This is where we talk about, and what I've said there is reality is mentally and socially and culturally constructed. Multiple realities exist. There are multiple interpretations. So in the literature, you might see constructionism, social constructivism, as another term used for an interpretive ontology. And this, what I mean by that is, there is no truth or right or correct answer. There's just, to coin a slightly inappropriate phrase, 50 shades of grey, or 50,000 shades of grey, actually. and that reality is actually constructed by the social setting, the cultural setting, and there may be some reality that purely comes from you. So if you're asking somebody their opinion on something, and that opinion is completely different from yours, that doesn't make their opinion wrong or any less true. It's their opinion. Equally, your opinion is your opinion. And so there is no seeking proof or fact. And in a qualitative ontology, you need to be absolutely clear that you understand that that's firstly not what you're looking for, and not what the research is going to look for. So this is where the two things have got to be, you've got to get them straight in your head. So you've got to make some decisions about what your ontology is going to be and is in this research proposal, and make sure that the research proposal that you're intending makes it clear. So two layers there. We all have specific ways that we look at the world, we look at information, and we interpret information. So when you pick up a piece of research, whether it's qualitative or quantitative, and that's sort of irrelevant, you look at it in a specific way. So when I read something, I read it differently from the way you read it or the way Rona reads it. There may be some commonalities. We may come from similar backgrounds, similar perspectives. We may have similar educational backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, and so on. So there may be some similarities, but you are looking at the world through a specific lens. Equally, when you set up your research proposal, you need to decide what that lens is going to be. And if that lens matches your personal lens, it does make your research slightly more real to you. I am sure I would be perfectly competent in undertaking a piece of quantitative research where I was undertaking an experiment. But it doesn't really sit particularly well with my view of the world. So I'm not sure I would undertake it in the same level of integrity. Is that the right way of putting it?
No, it's integrity. It's just that sheer passion and interest in what you're actually looking at. I don't think it's that integrity, because I think you would, but you haven't got the same desire to find results or look for new ones.
And so I would possibly not have that level of passion, and therefore that research wouldn't necessarily have the same value to me personally, but it wouldn't necessarily have the same value when presented. Equally, if you look at the world in a specific way, so if you are a positivist and you look at reality being independent of perception and driven by natural laws, so the kind of physics, chemistry, scientific research that we see in randomized control trials and clinical trials and so on, that testing and treatment evaluation sort of protocol, if that interests you and that is the way you view the world and that's the way you think, then that sort of project will sit better with you. So firstly, you need to decide on your own ontology, and then you need to ensure that the research proposal you write makes it clear what the proposal's ontology is. And if those two things match, then that's beneficial. But the ontology of your project needs to be very clear. So what it is you're trying to do, what are you trying to prove, or what are you trying to inquire into? And that's why getting the research aim and objectives is very clear, and it should be absolutely obvious to the reader. And this will translate when you go into your dissertation stage and when you go into the ethics stage. It should be absolutely clear to the person reading the proposal or reading the ethics submission that you know where you're coming from, and you know what you're trying to find out, and you know exactly what your research aim is. So that's your ontology and the ontology of the project.
No, it's really clear.
So we then look at epistemology, and this is where we're looking at how knowledge is acquired and what knowledge is. So if we come from an interpretive stance, we talk about knowledge being socially constructed. So what is appropriate and holds up to scrutiny now is socially and historically constructed, and that findings represent a creation. The process between the researcher and the subject is part of that knowledge generation. So if you are an interpretive researcher and you want to interview your participants because you want to seek to inquire what they know about a particular subject or a particular instance or a particular event, that exchange, that conversation is part of the process, and that knowledge generation is part of the iterative process of the research. And so that transcription of the conversation or the interview isn't enough. There needs to be either field notes or reflective diaries or some sort of context for that interview to stand up to scrutiny. And so when you decide on your project and you decide on your aims and objectives, think about your epistemology. How are you going to generate information? How are you going to generate data? And the constructionist or interpretive researcher believes that truth is based on pragmatic criteria. We really need to be realistic, that the world is not set in stone, and there's a degree of flexibility and there's a degree of real life ness to the research that we're looking at. So if you're interviewing somebody, you're having a conversation with them, and that's part of your research data collection process, there needs to be more information about that conversation, not just the straight words, because that's not enough. And what I mean by that is, if, for example, you asked somebody how they were feeling about their diagnosis, and you want to find out about how people manage a diagnosis of breast cancer, for example, and you say, how are you feeling today? And they go, I'm feeling fine. If you wrote that, that would be a simple statement, wouldn't it? But it isn't enough, is it? If they said, I'm feeling fine, but they said it in a certain way, or they positioned their body in a certain way, which meant that they weren't telling the truth, then you'd have to support that with information. So, for example, if I said to Rona, how are you feeling today? And she went, I'm feeling fine. And she did it in an aggressive way, and she put her hands up in front of her face, or she folded her arms in an aggressive manner, that would suggest to me that actually she isn't feeling fine at all. But equally, if I said, how are you feeling today? And she said, I'm feeling fine. And she smiled and she looked relaxed and she used a specific tone of voice, that would mean something else. So when we're looking from an epistemological stance at knowledge generation, we have to put it in context and we have to be realistic about it. And that relationship between the researcher and the researchee is really important in that generation of knowledge. That's if we're an interpretive researcher or we're looking at a qualitative piece of work. If we're looking at it from a positivist perspective, then we need to be detached, because when we talk about data generation from a positive perspective, we are talking about generating factual information. So we would be detached. It isn't the relationship between the researcher and the researchee that is of any interest in this particular field of research. So you therefore remove any of those variables from your research and you look at the specific cause and effect. So if I want to know how a particular drug works on a particular group of patients, then I go through a whole set of processes to ensure that that's the only thing I'm looking at. And so the relationship between me and the knowledge generation is very detached and very distant. So when you're developing your research proposal, you need to make this ontology and epistemology fundamentally clear to the reader, where you are coming from, and what you are trying to find out, and what your relationship to that data generation is going to be. So your position in the research is clearly stated. Any questions? I'm going to pause for a moment and just give you a moment to think about that in terms of your research. So I'm going to mute my mic in a second, and I'm just going to let you think for a minute about, have you made a decision about your ontology? Have you made a decision about your epistemology? And do you understand where you, as a researcher, are coming from in terms of those two questions? I'm just going to mute my mic for a moment. Okay, so hello then, welcome back. I've had a couple of questions. So yes, we're still going, Lisa. You haven't lost sound. I was just muted just for a moment. It's an interesting question. Dawn's just come and said that she'd like to do a piece of research that's interpretive, but she feels she's a positivist at heart.
Maybe this could change her.
Well, thank you.
Maybe we can sway her.
Yeah, that sounds like sexuality, doesn't
No,
it?
don't do it that way.
We're not going down that road at all. No, I completely understand what you're saying. Go over to the dark side. Yes, I know. But I think, and don't be swayed, because obviously I know that you're working in the acute sector and critical care sector, and I'm a critical care nurse as well. So I understand that level of sort of systematic scientific inquiry has a value, especially in critical care, and especially in the sort of the areas that you're working in. But is it the way you view the world? So is it that sort of factual measure that you find fascinating, you find interesting, and that you find challenging? And if you decide to develop a qualitative research project or research proposal for this module, it might not be what you go on and do for your dissertation, and you might go and do something different again for your PhD. But I'm making that assumption that you're definitely going to do it. And you're on this journey now, we're never going to get rid of you. But it is really important that you think about what you want to find out. And that will be influenced by the way you view the world. You can't help that. And so you think you might be a positivist, and I can understand why at heart you might feel that you're a positivist, but by developing a qualitative research proposal, you might see that actually advancing that sort of theoretical perspective might have value. So, you can be one and write something from another perspective. So that's, not problematic, but I understand what you're saying. Now, mixed methods is an interesting concept, because we have to be very clear when we say mixed methods that we actually mean mixed methods, not mixed methodologies, which are two totally different things. And I would suggest that there are projects, and they have huge, weight and strength and validity, that use certain methods of inquiry, so certain methods of data collection that sort of maybe naturally sit on the positivist stance or the interpretive stance. So, for example, you might do a very quantitative survey to assist you in identifying a sample. So, for example, if you wanted to find out how student nurses felt about a particular idea, you might send them a survey to find out their perspectives and then inquire further. But your underlying ontology and epistemology will be interpretive. You might be using mixed methods to answer that or inquire into that area. So be careful that you're talking about mixed methods and not mixed methodologies. I would suggest that there is no such thing as mixed methodologies, not truly. We might employ elements of qualitative and quantitative in the study, but your ontology and your epistemology need to be very clear, and they need to be one or the other. I don't think you can, I would say you can't be both in terms of methodology, but you can use mixed methods to answer a research question.
Correct.
Thank you.
I think it's that simple, really, isn't it? And don't start getting confusing you. And also remember, this is a master's piece of work. It is 1 year. Don't make things more difficult than you need to. Make it easy.
Yes. And so,
it's not that it is easy, but don't complicate it.
No. And you might be looking at all the sort of multiple layers of data collection and multiple phases of data collection, because there might be an iterative process. Just small and perfectly formed. We think about diamonds, not chocolate cakes, when we talk about research.
Yes.
Yeah, small and perfectly formed is perfectly good. And actually, you might look at it and think, really? Sounds a bit small and a bit limiting, but actually small projects often work out to be incredibly insightful, and there can be a real depth.
And keep it focused.
Yes. And if you have lots of phases of data collection or lots of methods of data collection, your research aims and your research objectives can get a little bit woolly. And that's when you can lose focus, and it can be quite difficult to manage. Right, so Polly said, my research is definitely positivist. Okay, so I think that comes from the subject area that you're coming from the genetic side. There is an element of positivist. There's a real wealth of positivist research in genetics. Equally, there's much more of an emerging body of knowledge about the qualitative interpretive research that's being done. So you can certainly come from both perspectives to answer your research question, but you think you're an interpretive by nature, so maybe you and Dawn need to have a sort of joint counselling session. As I said, I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. If I would say I'm very much an interpretive researcher, and my ontology and epistemology is very much socially constructed, and therefore I would find it quite difficult to embark on a piece of positivist research. It doesn't mean I couldn't, as I said at the beginning, but so you have to think about what you want to do. And I know I'm in the similar boat, but don't be pushed by your organisation into doing a piece of research that you don't want to do.
Totally.
I know that some of you are working in organisations that have said, we will pay for it if you do this. That's slightly immoral, and I'm not sure whether it's particularly legal. So I think, you might have to have the strength to say, thank you very much for your money, but I'm still doing the project I want to do. And I know that from personal experience. My head of school wants me to do a very specific piece of work for my doctorate, and I'm not doing it. It's in the same ballpark, but it's not what she wants, but she's still coughed up the money, so there you go. So far. Amanda, if you use patient perspective input in choosing your research question at master's level, I'm not sure I understand the question. If you are doing a piece of primary research, so you can approach patients and members of the public and other members of staff to answer your research questions. So you might send a questionnaire out or interview or do focus groups and so on. So yes, you can if you're doing a piece of primary research, but for you, if you're using a systematic review, you're using data that's already been published. So you're asking a new question of the data that's already in existence. Any other questions? Okay, so ontology, epistemology. Challenging, and it does take a little bit of thinking about and quite a lot of sort of working over in your own head about where you're coming from and where you want your research to come from, because it's then that you decide on your methodology. So this is where, once you've made those decisions about your ontology and epistemology, it should be clear what methodology you're coming from. So whether you are coming from a qualitative or quantitative perspective, whether you're coming from an interpretive or a positivist perspective. A systematic review sits within the positivist camp. it is a positivist method of evaluating data. So a systematic review would be considered to be a positivist piece of work, critical realist piece of work. You can do a narrative review, which is what you've done in MCH 501 to the literature. That's a narrative review. So it's a sort of qualitative look at the literature because you did a thematic analysis on what the literature said. So when we talk about literature reviews, we talk about a systematic review being the positivist stance, and we talk about a narrative review being the interpretive stance. So I forced you, those of you who did the previous module, to do a piece of interpretive work. You might not have known that at the time, but I did.
But you could tell the positivists in there.
Yes, but when reading them, you certainly could. Yeah, and that's sort of where you give it away, really, by the way you evaluate research. So, as I said at the beginning, when you look at a piece of research, you're looking at it from a specific lens, and that's your ontology and epistemology, which gives you, which influences the way you evaluate it. However systematic you're being, and or even when you're using scoring techniques like Kemet, which is a very positivist scoring mechanism, you can still give away your approach. And they did, really, didn't they?
They did. Absolutely. Clear as a bell.
So when we're talking about our methodology, then we are looking at, from the interpretive side, we might be looking at it from a hermeneutic perspective. So that looked at that written and written word and how we interpret the written word. So using the example that I gave about asking one question and having, I feel fine, written, if you were looking at it from a hermeneutic perspective, and you would be putting a reflective diary or some field notes with that piece of written work. And that your methodology would be interpretive, because your purpose is to uncover a variety of constructions. You're not expecting to come up with one answer when you do a piece of interpretive research. There will be a series of answers and series of responses which might fall into certain themes or narrations that you can link together. Because remember, your measure of quality in a piece of quantitative research is different from your measure of quality in a piece of qualitative research. And we'll talk about that a lot more tomorrow when we talk about your research proposal, so how you measure quality in each. So if your methodology is positivist, you're looking at an experimental design. So you may have a hypothesis that you need to test. You may have in your research aim a hypothesis, just breaking these teeth. And therefore, if you have a hypothesis, you should have a null hypothesis. So what are you trying to prove? And there will be degrees of control. So you will be including and excluding certain things, and you will have a really structured approach to your research design. So your methodology, once you've confessed your methodology, your research design then follows on quite nicely, which is why, as I said at the beginning, if you get your research aims and objectives right and your methodology right at the beginning and you set them out well, all the rest follows on quite nicely. So methodology, and then we go to our methods of data collection. So our methods of data collection will then be reflective of our methodology. So if we have sought to inquire about somebody's perceptions of something, our choice of method of data collection will follow a certain path. We're not going to get information about somebody's perceptions or knowledge or experiences about something if we observe them. So we would need to either interview them, or we might do a questionnaire, or we might do a focus group. But you have to ensure that your method of data collection will answer and address the research aim. So if I want to test if this drug is better than that drug, I need to set up a properly focused experiment. If I want to find out how people feel when they get a diagnosis, my most obvious choice of method of data collection should be an interview, because that's the only way I'm going to get that information, that valid and reliable information. So they follow on nicely. And that, when you're talking about your method of data collection, then you need to go into detail about how you're actually going to collect the information. And when you were reading other people's research, hopefully you looked at those pieces of research and saw how those things matched, that they put their research aims out there, they showed you how they were going to go about it, they talked about their methodology, and then they talked about their study design or their methods of data collection or their project in that order, and that they followed and they flowed nicely. Any questions? If we were in the class now, I'd be staring at you. Because I'm sure you've all got questions, but have I stunned you into silence? I know I've gone on and on and on and on and on about it this morning, but this bit is actually the real solid foundations for your research proposal. If we get, as I said at the beginning, if we get this right, then the rest is actually quite easy, or easier.
Let's make it easier.
Not quite easy. Okay. So, okay, I'm going to carry on for a bit because we've got a little bit more time. Yes, absolutely they are, but so Susie said, are questionnaires and interviews suitable for a positivist study? So yes, they are. Specifically a questionnaire, and in a questionnaire you can design a questionnaire appropriately so that you have got some information to test your hypothesis, because remember, if you're doing a piece of positivist work, you need to have a statement at the beginning that seeks some evidence, some cause and effect, some proof that you're going to try and measure against. And so if you're designing a questionnaire, so you're testing knowledge, aren't you, in yours, Susie? Isn't that your intent? I can't quite remember. Is it your intention to test whether they know something or they're able to do something? I'm going to open your mic, Susie. Can you speak? Susie? Oh, hello. I've unmuted you if you wanted to answer. Oh, right, okay. I'll remute you again. So if my memory serves me, that you wanted to test some knowledge, so you could design a questionnaire that might have some a Liggett scale or a multiple choice or some mechanism by which you can score their answers. Because if you want to do some statistical analysis on their responses, then you will need to have some sort of scoring mechanism to elicit some numbers to analyse. And in statistics, I mean, obviously there are many different statistical tests, and if you decide to go down this route, then we'll ensure that you've got some advice that you choose the correct statistical tool. to evaluate the information that you're coming up with. So if, for example, you want to see what proportion of students can do something, or what percentage, or what specific numerical device you can use to answer your research question. So if you, as you said there, you're testing to see whether students should have an OSCE, that's a yes/no answer, isn't it? So what is it exactly that you're trying to find out? That will their experience in first placement be more valuable, more worthwhile, more? So we've got lots of different measures there, and this is where we go back to that research aim and research objectives. So if you said ensured that the students had a more successful first placement, how are you going to measure success in the first placement? So with yours, Susie, you're looking specifically at outcome measures, and so you'll need to be very focused about what you're trying to find out. So going back to your original question, yes, you could use a questionnaire. The interview bit might be the way you measure success in the placement, but there would need to be some numerical device that you could score. So you could give them a satisfaction survey, or you could give them some sort of stress test, or all sorts of different measures that you could use to measure what the influence of the OSCE had been on first placement. So we'd need to make that very clear. So I hope that helps, Susie. But as soon as we've identified which research approach you want to take and what you want to measure, we'd be able to decide whether it was a questionnaire or an interview is most appropriate. Polly, I'm just looking at your question. Yeah, I think what I might do is have a chat with you another time, Polly, to address that question. Okay, so if you're looking, Elizabeth's looking at trying to understand why feeding interruptions occur. You could use either an interview or a questionnaire. It might be because that's quite a broad question. And so I would be asking, so if you want to find out why feeding interruptions occur, firstly I'd say, who do you want to ask and what exactly do you want to find out? Because if you, for example, did a questionnaire, you would guide them in exactly what specific questions you want to address. If you did an interview, you could address different questions, but just asking why might not be enough. You might need to break that down. But both those methods of data collection, an interview and a questionnaire, would allow you to address that question, but you might need to be much more focused. And this is where, I know I've said it over and over again, if we get the research aim right, we get all the rest in line. So it's not enough to just say, I want to find out this. You need to be very, very specific about what it is you want to discover. Have we got any other questions? I'm just looking at the time. We're 11:45 now. If we don't have any more questions in this section, I might pause and recap the other research methodologies after lunch, and carry on with the literature review. So your area of interest, Lisa. No, I'm not suggesting we stop now, but I just don't want to start a whole new section of the material. That's a really interesting question. How student nurses develop their academic writing skills through the programme. So that's quite a broad question. So again, I ask the question of you, what exactly are you trying to find out? Are you trying to find out if there are specific stepping points that they develop? Are you trying to find out, are there deficits in their academic writing skills that you want to discover? And if that's what you wanted to discover, you might send first years, second years and third years a questionnaire about academic writing. So is it a progression thing that you want to find out about? Is it where they access help? Is it something to do with their entry profile that influences their academic writing? And we know already that with widening participation agendas and our students having very varied academic profiles on entry, that their academic writing skills are very different. And is there any match between what we offer, what they access? Yes, there's lots of research. And I know one of our colleagues actually is doing a piece of research on evaluating the Writing Cafe and how people access it and how it improves progress and how it develops writing. So there's all sorts of different questions. And this is where, again, I say it's about making that research aim right at the very beginning very, very clear. So in your heads, what I want you to start thinking about is, what exactly do I want to find out? What do I want to know about this particular subject area? So if we focus on Lisa's example, what is it about academic writing that they find challenging? What is it about skills that you think that they need to know? So what is it specifically? Are there concerns? Do you want to find it out from, so what do you want to find out? And then equally, who are you going to ask and whose opinion are you asking? So are you going to find out what the students feel about academic writing, or is it what the staff feel about? So is there a difference in who you want to actually ask? So there's lots of different questions you need to ask yourselves. What exactly do I want to find out? Who am I going to ask? And then how am I going to ask them? Sorry. So lots of different questions, and yeah, absolutely, it does take quite a lot of time to hone that down and really drill that down into something very specific and focused. So, so we've got another question here about healthcare staff in the acute general hospitals perceive the provision of reasonable adjustments for patients with mental health problems. That is massive.
My first thought.
That is huge, Lauren. That is like a Department of Health funded, multi-centre, massive study. That's whopping. I don't. And so this is where size is absolutely not important. And I don't mean that in a rude way. Size is not important. Actually, the smaller the better, because that general subject area, which I know from your literature review, is what you're interested in. That idea of reasonable adjustments. So, firstly, my question would be: does everybody in the acute general hospital setting know what you're talking about? Do they know what reasonable adjustments are? So, my first question is: for example, ED staff really understand what reasonable adjustments are? And maybe that's the place that you start, because I'm not sure that they do. And I think that from reading your literature review, I don't think that they do. So actually, maybe we need to take a step back, and before we talk about general, a reasonable adjustment provision across the whole acute general hospital, maybe we should focus it about what staff understand to be reasonable adjustments. So it's about focusing your research question and making sure it's very, very clear. yes, you could narrow it to pre-assessment staff, so staff in either at MAU or ED, or those people that are on the, sort of the admission side of staff. So I think yes, it would be. So Diane, I'm just looking at yours. You manage minor injuries, and they're attending with medical problems. There's something to look at. Do patients' perceptions of the service? Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Do people really understand what a minor injuries unit is, a minor injuries service? But yes, you could absolutely ask about patient perception, and that would be a. But again, you would need to focus it very specifically on a specific group of people at a specific time in a specific geographic location, because you cannot say I'm going to do patient perception of a whole service in England, because that just is unreasonable for a master's project. So it might be about understanding local service provision and local patient perception. So yes, we might need to focus it. But it's really exciting that you've got such diverse and different research ideas, which does help me initially in thinking about supervisors, because it would be nice to match people with supervisors who have a specific interest. Wow, Michelle. I'm just looking at that and going, ethics, ethics, ethics. Newly diagnosed women decide regarding surgical intervention following rapid BRCA gene testing. Okay, Michelle, you and I need to have a conversation about ethics. I'm going to stop crying. I'm just, yeah, that sort of project is going to require unbelievably stringent IRS application, and so yeah, we'll need to have a conversation about that. So fabulous that you've all got great ideas, and it's really lovely to see, but it will help me enormously in setting out your research supervisors. Yeah, Dawn, I'd see yours about the DNAR and the TEP forms. I know, from your literature review, what you were looking at and interviewing primary and secondary care doctors. My discussion there would be, why do you want to do primary and secondary care doctors? Why is it doctors that you want to do? Is there not going to be a very different opinion to primary and secondary care? So is there a reason that you're making a comparison? Is it your intent to compare? If it's not your intent to compare the two groups, then I would focus on one, not both. And so there's lots of other little questions that we could ask. But it's great that you've all got some really interesting ideas to develop for your research proposals. So at that point, because we're 5 minutes from close, I'm going to stop, and we will reconvene at 1, and I will sort of carry on from here, and then we'll work through the advanced literature reviewing session this afternoon as well. So if you've got no other questions or comments, keep those ideas, keep writing down those ideas about your research questions, your research aims, because we're going to carry on working through them over the course of the module. So any other questions before I close? I'm not saying that you necessarily need to completely rethink, Michelle. I didn't mean to be mean. My only concern would be knowing the ethics provision a little bit, that if you wanted to interview newly diagnosed breast cancer patients, that there will be a very, very close supervision required, and therefore we'll need to talk about it, and I'll need to find you a very appropriate supervisor. So if that's really what you want to do. Realistically, there is a time constraint, and so maybe we could have a conversation outside the webinar. But the fun thing is that you're coming down on Tuesday, so it'll be great. We can really knuckle down and give it some specific thought then. Okay. Okay, so thanks very much, everybody. Thanks for your attention. And I will see you all at 1. Okay then, bye.